We tend to assume that history moves in one direction, that ancient people lived in the dark and we live in the light, and the distance between us and them is measured in progress. On the material level, this is obviously true. Modern medicine, sanitation, food security, individual rights, by almost any metric that can be quantified, we live longer, safer, more comfortable lives than anyone in the Roman Empire ever did. But there's a category of human need that doesn't show up in those metrics. The need for physical community, a relationship with death that doesn't produce anxiety, time that bends to the day instead of governing it, a civic life that asks something of us and gives something back, public space that belongs to everyone and gets used by everyone. These are social and psychological goods, and the Romans built them into the ordinary texture of daily life in ways we have quietly let fall away. This video is about those specific losses. It's an attempt to look honestly at what Roman society got right, measured against what we are missing now. This is not nostalgia. We will get to the enormous cost of Roman life before the end, so stick around for that. The point here is not that Rome was better. The point is that certain features of how Romans organized their days address real human needs that we still carry, and that modern life has stopped addressing. We assume that because we have improved materially, we have improved in every way that matters, but that assumption deserves careful analysis. Welcome to Folks of Yore. Roman daily life was organized around shared physical space in a way that made isolation structurally different. In one of his letters to Lucilius, Seneca complains about the noise. He's living above a bathhouse, and the sound is constant. He can hear the weightlifters grunting as they heave their dumbbells. He can hear the slap of hands on skin during massage. Ball players are shouting their scores. Someone has been caught stealing and is being beaten. A hair plucker is advertising his services in a high-pitched voice, and the only time he stops is when he's making a customer shriek louder than he does. Sausage vendors, cake sellers, and every kind of food hawker are calling out their wares in their own distinct pitch. Seneca's point is about inner calm. He's trying to argue that a wise man can find tranquility even in chaos. But what he documents, without meaning to, is an entire world happening inside a single building on an ordinary afternoon. Exercise, grooming, socializing, commerce, entertainment, all of it mixed together, all of it in public, all of it happening every day. The baths were the default social infrastructure of Roman life. By the imperial period, a mission cost almost nothing. A quadrans, the smallest Roman coin. Many baths charged nothing at all. This was where Romans went every afternoon. Senators and freedmen used the same water. Laborers and merchants stood in the same rooms. The structure of daily life pushed people into shared physical space as a matter of routine. And the body was part of this. Walking was the primary mode of transport. Bathing was a daily practice. Exercise happened at the baths before the bathing itself. None of this required a membership or a schedule. Physical movement was embedded in how the day already worked. No one needed to carve out an hour for it because the shape of ordinary life already contained it. We have a name for the kind of space the baths occupied. The sociologist Ray Oldenburg called it the third place, the place that is neither home nor work, where community life happens informally. Oldenburg argued that third places were disappearing from modern life, and that was in 1989. The trend has accelerated since then. We have coffee shops that discourage lingering. We have gyms that require contracts. We have public parks that close at dusk. The Roman baths were the third place operating at the scale of an entire civilization, open to nearly everyone, used daily, and understood as a basic feature of what it meant to live in a city. Romans maintained an active, public relationship with death that modern societies have almost entirely dismantled. The Greek historian Polybius, writing in the 2nd century BC, describes what happened when a distinguished Roman died. The body was carried into the forum and propped upright so the whole city could see it. A son or close relative delivered the eulogy, recounting the dead man's achievements. Then the procession began. Actors wearing wax portrait masks of the deceased ancestors rode through the streets in chariots, dressed in the official robes of whatever office each ancestor held. A former consul wore the consular robes. A former censor wore a censor's. At the forum, they sat in a row on ivory chairs, a visible lineup of the family's accumulated public life. Polybius says the effect was so powerful that the grief felt like something shared by the entire city, not just the family. Those wax masks, the imagines, lived in the home. They were displayed in wooden cabinets in the atrium, the first room any visitor entered. Lines were drawn between them to show the family tree. The dead were not stored away. They were the first thing a guest saw. They watched over meals, business dealings, domestic arguments. Growing up in a Roman house meant growing up surrounded by the faces of people who had already died. And death was visible beyond the household. Roman roads were lined with tombs. Many of them carried inscriptions addressed to passing strangers. "Stop, traveler, and read." Some were brief and factual, some were conversational, some were funny. A Roman walking to the next town would pass dozens of the dead on the way, each one asking to be noticed. We have moved death almost entirely out of public view. Most people in the modern West die in hospitals. The body is handled by professionals. Funerals happen in buildings designed for that purpose, set apart from daily life. The dead are buried or cremated and placed somewhere we visit occasionally, if at all. There is growing research in psychology suggesting that this avoidance does not reduce our anxiety about death, it increases it. The Romans did not avoid death. They made room for it in the architecture of ordinary life, and it sat there visibly every day. Roman time was organic, variable, and tied to natural light, and the culture built a philosophical framework around this that treated unstructured time as the highest form of living. The Roman day was divided into 12 hours from sunrise to sunset. This meant the hours changed length with the seasons. A summer hour in Rome was roughly 75 minutes. A winter hour was close to 45. Time bent with the calendar. There were sundials and water clocks, but they were imprecise and nobody used them the way we use a watch today. Life was organized around light, meals, and public rhythms. The baths opened in the early afternoon. Business happened in the morning. Evening was for eating. These markers were approximate and everyone understood that. Inside this looser architecture of time, Romans developed a distinction that shaped how they thought about a well-lived life. Otium and negodium, which I discussed before in my most popular video. Negodium was the world of obligation, business, public affairs. The word literally means not leisure. Otium was its opposite, the contemplative life, the space where philosophy, reading, friendship, and self-examination happened. Otium carried moral weight. It was the thing a serious life was supposed to arrive at. A person consumed entirely by negodium, by the endless churn of appointments and ambitions, was by Roman standards a person whose real life had not yet started. Seneca's essay De Brevitate Vitae is built on this distinction. His argument is that life is long enough if we use it well. The problem is that most people never do. They chase offices, attend spectacles out of habit, socialize for status, and fill every hour with activity that feels productive but leads nowhere. They treat negodium as the substance of life and odium as something they will get to later, after one more obligation, one more year. They never arrive. Seneca calls this a civilization error, not a personal failing. We live inside a time architecture that's entirely artificial. Every hour is identical. Every minute is accounted for. The day does not bend to the season. We have no cultural equivalent of odium. The closest phrase we have is free time, and the poverty of that phrase tells the whole story. It defines the time by what it is free from, but it says nothing about what the time is for. Roman food production was embedded in seasonal rhythm and domestic labor in a way that made eating an act connected with the land rather than a consumer transaction. The Roman diet tracked the land. The Mediterranean triad of grain, olives, and grapes organized both agriculture and cuisine. What people ate followed what the soil was doing in that season. A much larger share of the population had direct involvement in growing, preparing, or preserving food. Even wealthy households managed agricultural estates. The kitchen was a site of labor, not a place where purchased goods were reheated. We have fully abstracted the food chain. Most of us have no contact with the production of what we eat. Meals are purchased. Ingredients arrive from supply chains we never see, in seasons that have nothing to do with what is actually growing nearby. We buy food the way we buy anything else. The Romans grew it, prepared it, and ate it as one continuous act. Romans treated public infrastructure as a civic duty and a measure of political legitimacy, and they designed cities around collective use rather than private convenience. In 97 AD, the Emperor Nerva appointed a man named Sextus Julius Frontinus to the post of water commissioner for the city of Rome. Frontinus took the job seriously enough to write a full official report on what he found. The document, De Aqueductu, is one of the most unexpectedly compelling texts to survive from the ancient world. It's a bureaucrat's account of plumbing, and it's written with genuine passion. Frontinus documented 9 aqueducts feeding the city, stretching over 400 kilometers, delivering somewhere between 600,000 and 800,000 cubic meters of water per day to a population of over 1 million people. Per capita water delivery in Imperial Rome was roughly comparable to a modern European city. The report reads like a man who believes that public infrastructure is sacred. The attitude Frontinus represents was widespread. Roads, aqueducts, and sewers were understood as things the state owed the people. The Cloaca Maxima, the great sewer of Rome, was maintained continuously for centuries. Political legitimacy was tied to building. An emperor or magistrate proved he deserved power by putting his name on an aqueduct, a bathhouse, or a road. Public works were how authority justified itself. And the cities themselves were designed around this principle. Vitruvius, writing his architectural treatise De Architectura around 25 BC, laid out how a Roman city should be planned. Streets oriented for wind and light. The Forum was placed at the center of legal and commercial life. Theaters, baths, and basilicas designed as civic gathering spaces. Housing, commerce, temples, and public buildings layered on top of each other, sharing the same streets. The city Vitruvius describes as dense, walkable, and mixed use. Daily life happened on foot, in public, within earshot of neighbors. There was no residential zone separated from a commercial zone by a highway. The whole city was one continuous public environment. We have inherited almost none of this. Modern infrastructure is chronically underfunded and politically unglamorous. Cities, particularly in North America, have been redesigned around cars. The walkable, mixed-use, publicly oriented city that Vitruvius treated as obvious has become an aspirational planning ideal that most cities fail to achieve. Frontinus would not recognize our priorities. Roman leisure was woven into the civic and religious calendar as a shared public rhythm that gave the year its shape. Ovid's Fasti, written around 8 AD, walks through the Roman calendar month by month, documenting the festivals, rituals, and observances attached to each day. The poem covers January through June and was left unfinished, but what survives is enough to see how densely the Roman year was populated with shared events. The Lupercalia in February, when runners in goatskin loincloths raced through the streets striking bystanders with leather thongs. The Megalesia in April, a week of games honoring the goddess Cybele. The Floralia in late April, a festival of flowers, theatrical performances, and public feasting that spilled into May. Dozens of smaller sacrifices, processions, and observances filled the gaps between the major festivals. Ovid doesn't treat any of this as a disruption to ordinary life. For him, the calendar is the city's shared narrative, retold every year through performance. By the imperial period, public games alone accounted for roughly 93 days of the year. Religious festivals filled much of the rest. The majority of the Roman year carried some form of public observance. They involved processions through city streets, theatrical performances, chariot races, public feasting, and communal worship. They cut across class. A senator and a freedman watched the same races on the same afternoon because the calendar said so. The categories we use to organize this kind of experience did not exist in Rome. A festival was simultaneously a holy day, a public spectacle, and a day off work. Separating these into religion, entertainment, and free time would have made no sense to anyone standing in the crowd. The experience was singular. The sacred and the pleasurable and the civic occupied the same afternoon. We have divided these things completely. Leisure is private. Entertainment is purchased. Religion, for those who practice it, happens in dedicated buildings on a dedicated morning. Public holidays exist, but they're sparse, secular, and largely commercial, so they don't really give the year a continuous felt rhythm. The Roman year had a shape. Ours is flat. Romans treated the ability to speak well in public as a foundational civic skill, and this was embedded in political culture where participation was direct, consequential, and expected. Quintilian published his Institutio Oratoria around 95 AD, 12 volumes on the education of the orator. The work is enormous in scope, covering everything from how a child should be taught to read to the specific techniques of courtroom argumentation. But the entire project rests on a single principle. The ideal person is vir bonus dicendi peritas, the good man skilled in speaking. For Quintilian, these two things could not be separated. Rhetorical ability without moral character was dangerous. Moral character without rhetorical ability was incomplete. A good person who could not speak well was failing in his obligations to the community. And this was a common position across Roman society. Rhetorical training was the backbone of Roman education. Boys from citizen families trained in declamation, argumentation, and persuasion as core curriculum. They practiced composing speeches on assigned topics, arguing both sides of legal cases, and delivering their work in front of teachers who judged them on logic, style, and delivery. It was preparation for general citizenship, not a specific career pathway that only some chose. The training existed because the political system demanded it. During the Republic, citizens voted in assemblies, they served on juries, they participated in public deliberation where outcomes were determined by who made the better case. Patron-client relationships ran on face-to-face persuasion. The Forum was a working political space where legal cases were argued in the open, political speeches were delivered to crowds, and elections played out in front of people who could respond in real time. The quality of an argument could determine a verdict, a career, or a policy. Oratory was the technology of self-governance. Even after the Republic ended and real power shifted to the emperor, rhetorical education persisted. Quintilian was writing under Domitian, long after the assemblies had lost their teeth. He still insisted that the orator was the model of civic life. Romans continued to understand public speech as the mark of a formed citizen, even when the political context that originally required it had changed. The skill had become part of what it meant to be Roman. We do not train citizens to speak. We don't train them to construct arguments or to evaluate the arguments being made to them. Rhetoric, which sat at the center of Roman education for centuries, is barely taught in modern schools. Political participation has been reduced to voting in elections that happen every few years, for representatives most people will never meet on issues that feel distant from daily life. The forum, where a citizen's voice could change a verdict in real time, has no modern analog. Now here comes the major caveat that I promised at the beginning. Every structural advantage described in this video was built on top of systems of profound inequality and suffering. The baths were cleaned by slaves, the aqueducts were built with slave labor, the leisure that allowed citizens to participate in public life, to train in rhetoric, to pursue otium, depended on an enslaved underclass doing the work that made all of it possible. Slavery was not a peripheral feature of Roman society, it was the engine. The citizenship that gave access to assemblies, legal protections, and the grain dole excluded the majority of people living under Roman rule. Women could not vote or hold office. Freedmen had limited rights. Vast populations across the provinces lived as subjects, taxed and governed without consent. The civic life this video has described was real, but it was reserved for a minority. Life expectancy at birth was roughly 25 to 35 years, driven largely by staggering infant mortality. Medical care was rudimentary, famine was recurrent, violence was casual and spectacular, crucifixion was a standard punishment, political purges killed thousands. The same forum where citizens argued legal cases was also the same place where proscription lists were posted, naming men whose property was seized and whose lives were forfeit. For most people, their lives would be significantly worse if they were to time travel to Rome. But the question is, what did they build into the ordinary structure of daily life that we have let fall away? And can we recover any of it without the brutality that originally sustained it? I think we can, and we should. If you enjoyed this video, you should check out this video about the modern death of friendship. Also consider liking, subscribing, hitting the notification bell, and leaving a comment about your thoughts. I love reading through what you all have to say. Thanks again, until next time.